cytotoxicity compared with MTA is incorporated bismuth oxide. What do you have any idea of it?
I confess to you, I'm not really familiar with the, let's say, biological compatibility studies on zirconia. I think they are certainly important as we see more and more of these implants made of zirconia. I mean, I would assume that they should be compatible with tissues simply because, you know, it was originally used as implants, you know, for femur. They have been used for dental implants. And it seems to me that the problems with them was not associated with a bad compatibility reaction, but rather more a mechanical issue with the implant, and also issues with dental implants are probably related to mechanical. So I don't think there is necessarily a problem of compatibility. I believe you can improve because not only the components of zirconia, but also the characteristics of the surface, right? I mean, roughness, contact angle, all of these are fundamental for cell adhesion, deposition, and let's say, friendly relationship. So I honestly do not follow studies on that. I mean, it's not really my strength on zirconia. If you ask me, I would probably not make a choice to do zirconia implant myself, you know, either on patients or on myself. I don't think the advantages that brings or comes with zirconia implants overcome the problems that might be there because of all these machining issues, you know. So, yeah, I'm sorry, I will leave you with no answer, but my point in terms of compatibility will be this. I don't think it's a major issue, but it can be improved by modifying the composition, modifying the characteristics of the surface. You might get better, you know, let's say, integration with human tissues.
Okay, so I would like to know if you know, so what kind of phase of zirconia oxide is incorporated in MTA, you know?
MTA into zirconia, no, I'm sorry, I don't have this information. I haven't, as I said, I'm not following most of these new investigations, but I can tell you they are working on improving zirconia. I don't know how long this will take, but you know, this group in France from Dr. Chevalier, they have been using different types of stabilizers instead of using yttria, for instance, using magnesium, using cerium, using other sorts of materials that would eventually make zirconia more, let's say, improve the toughness, which is a great characteristic, but without compromising, you know, the properties, aesthetics, and so forth. How much longer this will go, as I said, as long as zirconia is an interesting commodity out there, it will probably go further. But at a certain point, people will start realizing, me as a clinician, honestly, I mean, it's my preference. If I have a molar crown, I will probably use lithium bisilicate.
Okay.
I can get better aesthetics, I can do better bonding, and my prep will have to be at least 1 millimeter thick, you know, in terms of crown. Even if I do zirconia, I can still cut down and leave 1 millimeter thick in relief. So, and I can bond much better to lithium disilicate than I can bond to zirconia.
Okay.
So my preference for zirconia would only be perhaps in a 3-element, you know, 3-unit bridge, 4-unit bridges, or a longer span for anterior teeth only. That I wouldn't mess with that for a, you know, like these people are doing. Protocol implant rehabilitation with zirconia infrastructure. It's a recipe for disaster. I mean, it's so rigid the structure and all these long span zirconia. If you don't know exactly what it is, it's kind of risky.
Okay. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Yes?
It's always it's a great pleasure for us to join your lecture.
Thank you.
This is my 4th time. So you showed that zircon in your presentation.
Zircon, yeah,
It's probably from the BISCO.
yeah.
Could you please tell us about something more?
It's MDP. It's a solution of MDP. All these zirconia primers, as far as I know, it's a mix of MDP in different concentrations with other, vehicles to change viscosity, but either make it a gel or a liquid. But to me, my understanding is they're all based on MDP functional monomer. That's, guaranteed.
And so it will help to prevent the debonding of the surface.
Well, it helps to improve the chemical adhesion between the cement and the zirconia surface. I mean, this was maybe 1 or 2 studies that came out of Japan, actually, when they showed, they were investigating, Panavia, or Panavia, the cement, and they discovered, Matthias Karn from Germany, they discovered that over the longer term, MDP containing cements were providing, let's say, better adhesion or longer term adhesion to zirconia. So they decided why this cement is better than the others. And then the common point was the MDP, mostly on Panavia. So then they did specific studies to investigate the ability of MDP to bond to zirconia chemically. And they found some chemical bonding in there on this oxidized surface of zirconia. But it is so weak, if you will, you cannot really measure. You can tell by if I use MDP before the cementation or whether I don't use MDP before cementation, you do get some improvements in bond strength. So that's why every manufacturer now, MDP is available, everybody can make it now. Everybody wants a share of the market. So that's why the first one came out as Ivoclean from Ivoclar. And then Zirclean from BISCO, Curare has, and if you start going to different countries, you will see a lot of people having their zirconia primer.
Thank you so much for your answer.
Yep. And now I remember your name. Let's go.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. My first question is the zirconia, and how about the wear behavior of the enamel?
Okay, good. That's a very good question. Well, zirconia again was originally the 3YTZP was always to be used as an infrastructure, so it was not supposed to be exposed and in contact, because they would say, well, this will probably wear enamel. And what do we know? And there was one of the things in one of those papers that I showed, they were evaluating this monolithic zirconia. And yes, one of the things that happened positively, if you will, with these new monolithic zirconias is that they are called wear friendly. So they produce less wear on enamel. And actually by just wearing this, they become smoother, if you will. So they are much better in terms of wearing the opposite dentition, particularly against enamel. So that's an improvement, if you will, for this monolithic versus the original. But again, it's hard to compare because you were not supposed to use a 3YTZP, a much harder material, as a full crown. But if you would, you will probably have way more damages, if you will, to the opposing enamel than when you have this new material. So I would say, I don't have any specific data for you, but every paper shows that they are more wear-friendly than the other materials. So I would say they would be similar to lithium disilicate. So you would see, of course, some wear on opposing enamel and some on the material itself. This enamel is a pretty hard structure. So, but I don't think this has been raised as a big problem for these materials.
Because as we know, most of time we cannot avoid to adjustment, in oral. So after adjustment, must be have the
You have to
scratch.
repolish, yeah, you
Yes.
have to repolish the surface. And there are several instruments or polishing machine or polishing stones that are supposed to be used on zirconia. And they seem to be effective. I mean, they seem to make the surface smoother and recover the necessary adjustment. The problem is, adjusting this new monolithic zirconia, we don't know what happened. All these studies that showed the monolithic transformation or the phase transformation back to monolithic were done with the original 3YTZP material. We assume the same happens. So when you are doing a monolithic zirconia nowadays and you have to make adjustments, you are assuming that you were producing damages that you were not supposed to do. But as far as I know, nobody has actually investigated this with the new materials. The major problem, I think, with the new materials is the scratches. I mean, everything that leaves the scratches on the surface, from the polishing, from the milling, from whatever you are using on the surface, those are sites that crack propagation usually initiates. Whether it is just because of the shape, the morphology, and stress concentrations in there, or it may be because by doing so, you generated a phase transformation in that particular site, which makes the material weaker and then initiates the crack propagation. I honestly don't know of any study that has specifically investigated this in order to clarify which is.
Thank you so much. And another question is, until now, we already have many restoration materials. That means we have more than one choice. For example, inlay, onlay. We also can choose resin composite. Yeah, so how do you decide? Okay, this patient, I will do the resin composite. This patient, okay, the zirconium, this patient, maybe they're like the other materials.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. Yeah, well, that's why we have to study 4 years to become a dentist, make decisions clinically. But, you know, in a simple way, my mind, in my practice, let's say, zirconia is out. So I don't use zirconia for anything. So one down. In terms of whether I'm going to use a direct restoration versus an indirect restoration, it depends on the size. You know, if you have a small cavity or a contained cavity, this is valid for all sorts of materials, right? The bigger the cavity, the bigger the exposure of your restorative material to the oral environment and function, probability of durability reduces, right? This is true for all sorts of material, amalgams, composite. So if you have a contained restoration, I would do direct composite. If it is a much bigger destruction and I need a crown in order to protect the remaining structure, then I'll go with a crown. You know, and most of the cases nowadays, if it is a single tooth, a single crown, ceramic will do the best materials. Probably lithium-silicate will be a good option, you know, for all the reasons we discussed. But you can always use, you know, these indirect composites. It's becoming more and more popular, as we know here in Japan. The insurance pays for the composite, right? Doesn't pay for the ceramic, as far as I understand. So that's why all the Japanese companies and many other companies are now investing money to produce these milled, processed composites that can be used. And they are really good. I mean, they're aesthetic, they're easy to mill, they're easy to polish, and you cement it same way. So you've got options. I would say, clinically, if I have a cavity that involves interproximal, right, mesial or distal, if the opening is, say, more than half of your buccal-lingual distance, unless you are a really skillful clinician, that you can work well with the wedging, the matrix, and insertion and sculpture of your composite, that's fine. But you will probably spend way more clinical time than if you just make your walls divergent, take an impression and make it outside in cement. Chair side time is much reduced. And clinicians think about, you know, chair side, how long you are taking to do the job and how much you are charged for it. And in the end, an indirect composite will likely be better in terms of interproximal shape, contour, interproximal contact, polishing, anatomy. So all these advantages come with the indirect material rather than spending maybe 1 or 2 hours eventually trying to build this beautiful, huge composite restoration that we see in many places. They're beautiful, they're aesthetic, but for the practice, I don't think they are really, you know, profitable. I would rather do something for my patient that spend less time in the chair, and still I have, you know, confidence that the material or the resource that I'm using are okay for that situation. I will go with that.
Thank you so much.
And zirconia, yes, I mean, I would not rule out, but I would probably use only for bridges, infrastructure for bridges, and you know, eventually anterior restorations. But I would be very concerned about long span, particularly when you don't know the characteristics from the manufacturer.
Thank you.
Okay. Jack?
So Rick, can you hear this?
Is it working?
Okay. Yeah, so thank you. Very nice, as usual. So my question is kind of a practical one. You know, you mentioned that the dentist doesn't always know what they're getting from the lab in terms of zirconia. The lab may be making a mistake in terms of what they're supplying. They're not providing what the prescription asks for. Is there a practical way for the dentist to be able to tell when they get the crown back which zirconia do they have?
No, not that I'm aware of. I mean, I don't think there is like a scan or something that you can just, no. Yeah, you would probably have to do a more robust analysis. That's what probably they did.
So do you think you could, I mean, do you think if you looked at different thicknesses of zirconia, of the different types, and just, would there be some way of shining the light through it that the dentist can say, oh, you know, I see this is the translucent zirconia
Yeah.
versus not?
Well, not that I'm aware, but you can tell here for this particular study, let me try to pull it back here. There is a picture here. Yeah, there. You see, those are different types of material up here. And although you can tell they are slightly different, but you know, it's really hard to tell that this is the 5% rather than this is the 3 or the 2 or the 4. Yeah, I'm not aware if there is a possibility. I would rather design a test based on density. You know, like Eureka, just put it in there depending on how dense is your material. You would probably be guessing more, but the differences are probably too small to be able to identify by, you know, density measurements. And yeah, the crown has a very complex shape to measure it and so forth.
So maybe if you took a hammer and you tried to smash it.
Yeah, that's what they used to do. Remember when zirconia came around? I don't know if you remember in congresses and events, they had this huge, you know, piece of zirconia or whatever, and they gave yourself or whoever was visiting a hammer, a mallet, and they would ask you to mallet and hammer that thing to see if you would break it or not, and compare to metal. That was the marketing to zirconia. I've seen this in Brazil, at least I've seen this. You hammer, this is stronger than anything. And yeah, you sell, right? I mean, that's it, it's not, you know, it's not a lie. It is a strong material, but that's not the only thing we need for a material for a crown or prosthesis. But yeah, that could be a good thing, you know, if the dentist can really check what they're getting, right? But I don't know, I don't think clinicians are, I mean, they trust the lab. But then when I asked them in clinical courses, they said, have you ever been to the lab? You know, that you were, you know, getting your crowns from? And they said, why? Why do I go to the lab? I said, well, because you need to know what they're doing for you, right? So yeah, it's a disconnection. It's a disconnection there.
Rick, how about using acoustic methods?
Using what?
Acoustic methods to answer Jack's question.
Well, yes, there are ways, probably, there are ways instead of, you know, using specifically chemical analysis. But I believe the idea that Jack questioned was something that you can use chairside, right, in your practice. I don't think you were gonna have an
No, it
acoustic.
will be lab,
Yeah,
of course.
you know, so, yeah, something for startups.
Yeah, brilliant.
Any entrepreneur.
Brilliant scattering.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess perhaps, you know, Razan might have some ideas on how, but the key question here is, when you receive the crown, how do you know whether it was actually even zirconia in the first place, right? That's the major problem, we don't even know. And that was happening in the past, people were producing, I remember when lithium disilicate came into the market and became this big thing. In Brazil, there were many laboratories selling lithium disilicate, and they were just mixing any ceramic and cooking into this inlay onlay. And they delivered to the clinician. I mean, they're all beautiful, you know. And that's the point. You have to ask yourself, what am I getting? And when I have a clinical failure, why? Right? Try to dig back into the root cause of that failure and not just, oh, let's do it again, let's do it again, let's do it again. If you're doing it again with the very same lab, poor material, that's not going to solve the problem. I guess we went over and over and over again. So,
Okay, thank you, presentation.